right, a very good morning once again, and many thanks for joining us on this very great occasion. We are going to be discussing, yes, COVID-19 and the education sector. How do we inculcate ICT infrastructure or technology to ensure continued learning for our learners? In a country where you do have only 40% internet penetration, that is going to be quite a nick. It's going to be quite a challenge, and that's why we are here. COVID-19 and the education sector, opportunities and challenges of digitalization. That's why we are here, and we shall be talking to Mr. Patrick Tumwine. He shall be setting the stage for this conversation. He is the Technical Advisor, Governance and Human Rights at GIZ. Maxwell Odongo shall be joining us online. He is an economist and education is currently working for the National Planning Authority as a planner in the spheres of education and skills development. We shall also hear it from Irene Nakakande. She's here physically. Irene is the Deputy Executive Director of Somero Uganda, a grassroots NGO that protects and promotes the human rights of vulnerable children and young women through education, skills development, and health promotion. Well, we shall also hear from Tobias Hebasa. He is over there within our midst. Tobias is the Information Technology Officer from Kabale District Local Government. What are some of the challenges dampening the resolve of the local leaders to ensure that we develop ICT infrastructure during this COVID-19 pandemic? He shall be giving us a situation analysis of how they are grappling with those challenges within Kabale District Local Government. We shall also hear from Becca Birukuja. He shall be appearing online. Becca has been a practicing advocate for over 6 years with experience in a number of areas, largely on compliance and regulatory matters in the information technology IT sector. He is currently the Manager, Licensing and Legal Affairs at the Personal Data Protection Office, which role enables him to provide regulatory oversight on activities related to data protection and privacy. So there you have it. Those are some of the panelists. Let me invite those who are within our midst. Irina Kakande, you can come over and take over your seat at the podium. Also Tobias, or you can also come over and take over your seat. Education during COVID-19, opportunities and challenges of digitalization. That is the $64,000 question that is going to be dissected right here and right now during our digital security conference. That is Irina Kakande making her way to the podium, Deputy Executive Director of Somero Uganda. Well, that is also Mr. Tobias Hebasa, the Information Technology Officer coming in from Kabale. Thank you very much, gentlemen and lady, for joining us, and also very good morning to the online community that is actually joining us right now for these deliberations. We would like to know, what role does digitalization play in access to education during this COVID-19 pandemic? We've actually touted the significance of actually using online technologies to actually ensure continued learning. You do have learners who have been coming in from well-to-do families. They were largely able to actually get a hold of these technological gadgets in a bid to ensure continued learning. But those from the rural settings, the rural areas where internet penetration is at 40%, have been largely unable to continue with their education. What are the ramifications that would be birthed out of such contestations? The fact that the educational gap is going to be increased between the rich and the poor. How do we limit that gap from actually widening? That's why we are here and having these experts within our midst. Patrick Tumwine is the Technical Advisor and is going to be helping us set the stage for this conversation, giving us a preamble into what we are going to be discussing right now. Is the COVID-19 pandemic helping us to boost the digitalization of the education sector, or is it enforcing more inequalities? That's what we are talking about right now, and how do we overcome all this? Let me take this opportunity to invite Patrick Tumwine, the Technical Advisor, Governance and Human Rights at GIZ, to help us set the stage for this conversation. All right, Patrick, the floor is yours. You want to use this one? All right.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone present here. My name is Patrick Tumwine, as the moderator has already said, and I work with GIZ, and we're glad to be here and to discuss this important subject that talks about education, but also COVID-19. Education during COVID-19, what are the opportunities and challenges of digitalization? As you're aware, Uganda is one of the countries in the whole world that remained with schools closed, and for over 77 weeks. This is according to the United Nations Children's Fund, UNICEF, data that provided that we did get this. And this is followed by Nepal, which is closed 74 weeks, and Bolivia, 73 weeks. So this makes Uganda one of the only countries in the whole world that has kept the schools closed up to 77 weeks, and we're still counting. Of course, as by the President's communication yesterday, this means that the schools will remain closed until January. So by January, you can count how many more weeks schools will remain closed. And having said that, what does that mean then to our learners outside there, within Kampala, outside Kampala, in rural schools? This multi-stakeholders exchange forum on COVID-19 response and resilience provides an opportunity for the state and non-state actors to have exchange and discuss critical issues on what opportunities, challenges, and probably the recommendation that brings on the table for our learners to be able to continue learning in this country. The COVID-19 pandemic has created the largest disruption of education system in recent history. And worldwide, there are more than 1.2 billion children in 186 countries affected by school closure due to the pandemic. As a result, education has changed dramatically. And what does this mean? With a distinctive rise of e-learning, everybody talks about e-learning at the moment, and we'll have a conversation today to probably dig deeper how this is effective and what are the challenges in that. The research suggests that the changes this coronavirus has caused will probably stay for the next couple of years or decades. Yet almost half of the world's students face significant barriers of online learning, equipment, connectivity, power, learning space, mention them. The COVID-19 pandemic poses a serious threat to access to education as well as other opportunities for the learners in this country. Innovative solutions are needed to support this sector and ensure our students continue learning in schools. The Ministry of Education and Sports developed preparedness and response plan for all stakeholders, which outlines the conditions and communication strategies as well as the capacities of the government to ensure continuity of learning during school closure. And we will interrogate how effective this has been and how best can we engage on this.
Of course, it has been less effective because according to the investigations we've been mounting, not all learners in the various 135 districts were able to get a hold of these educational materials. So this is something we should actually interrogate.
We will discuss that, Romeo. Thank you very much. To ensure students are still engaged in e-learning, education programs are aired via radio services to reach the population. The Ministry of Education also published the COVID-19 education sector response guidelines and different resources online, including materials for self-study and guidelines for parents. This has happened. The Ministry of Education has made an effort. There's something that is happening in the country to ensure that our learners continue learning. But of course, there are challenges this COVID has caused. There are opportunities this COVID has caused. And therefore, there are lessons we need to learn and probably provide a solution. As I said, from the President's communication yesterday, the school will remain closed until January. But how else can we continue our students learning? How can we reach people in Kaperamaido, Kaperabyong, and issues of digitalization? How effective have they been? So this is the conversation we're having.
Patrick Chinwine, do you feel like there's goodwill coming in from the central government to ensure continued learning? I mean, we're talking about a government that came out with proposals to distribute 9 million radios to these citizens in this country, 130,000 TV sets, but then we didn't secure a funding from funding totaling to 336 billion Uganda shillings. That money did not come through. Do you feel like there is goodwill coming in from government to actually ensure measures are put in place to go ahead with continued learning?
There is commitment from, as you've been following, and from the onset where the president made it very clear that they needed, life was more fast, safe than the learning. And as per the statistics, Uganda remained one of the countries in the whole world that registered fewer cases of deaths. And students and closure of schools contributed greatly to the reduction of that. But the important question which you put is, how else or what else did the government do to ensure that much as there is closure, there is save of lives, but there is also continuity for our learners to continue learning even beyond this. As I said, COVID is here to stay, but we need to find better solutions to how effective the e-learning can continue. In terms of budget allocation and the rest of the things, I think there was commitment towards the Minister of Education to see that the rural schools are reached out in terms of how they can learn. But there's more can be done.
Indeed.
Thank you.
All right, that is Mr. Patrick Chumwine, Technical Advisor, Governance and Human Rights at GIZ. He shall be joining us a little bit, now and later on to give us snippets of information that we need as far as this conversation is concerned. In my midst, I also do have Nakakande Irene. She is the Deputy Executive Director of Somero Uganda. We want to know what her organization does and how efforts from her NGO have gone a long way to bridge the digital divide that we are seeing right now. And also in my midst, I have Tobias Habasa, the Information Technology Officer, coming in from Kabale. Online, Maxwell Odongo shall be joining us later on. Yes, he's grappling with a few issues, but he shall be joining us later on online. He won't be alone. Becca Birikuja shall also be joining us online to actually talk about that conversation and a lot more. 1.6 billion young learners have lost over 1.8 trillion hours of school. Yes, since the COVID-19 pandemic hit. We need to put in place more measures that will go a long way to ensure continued learning. And one of the measures or recommendations that have come out pertain to the use or maximization of ICT. Yes, ICT infrastructure, even before the pandemic, COVID-19. We were actually slow in the adaptation when it comes to technology owed to ICT. Many schools were reluctant, were adamant to inculcate ICT within their curriculum. Many were saying, well, funding is an issue. We do not have funding to get that infrastructure in our premises. Many were also saying that they couldn't actually do away with cyber attacks that could actually be birthed as a result of the integration of these ICT. Many would say exam malpractices aren't actually easily, it's not easy to nab people who are engaged in exam malpractice online. That's what they were saying. So many had resorted to conventional ways of education. But then the pandemic hit, and it's now forcing many of these educational institutions to apply or inculcate ICT infrastructure within their curriculum. Large and fair, how will they be able to do that? Well, let me bring in Irene Nakakande to interrogate our first question, the role digitalization plays in access to education. A very good morning once again, Irene. The floor is all yours.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, let's start with Somero Uganda, the NGO that you run, what you do there, and the role digitalization plays in access to education.
Okay, when it comes to Somero Uganda is a non-government organization that is basically looking at promoting the human rights of vulnerable children and young women.
All right.
And this is done mainly through education, skills development, as well as health promotion.
All right, maybe you can use the mic to your right.
Okay, so...
This one to my side.
This one?
Yep.
All right. So when it comes to education, we are basically looking at how we can support children and young people to complete their education through secondary, through primary, and even reach out to university for them to realize their potential. However, we realize the majority of these drop out from the way. So what we mainly do as Somero is to look at those that have really dropped out and see how to empower them to be able to earn a living. And however, we feel that with this empowerment, since many of them have not gone to school for higher levels, they really feel insecure in finding jobs. So we look at how can they use ICT to be able to earn a living. And this we do through trainings of 6 months, to train them through secretarial studies, train them through photography and video editing, as well as graphic designing, to see that they are able to use a camera, they are able to use a computer to be able to earn some kind of living. Yes.
How do you access these children? Because they are not in a school setting, they're in communities. How do you access them?
In the community, we mainly work with the local leaders. We work a lot with the local leaders because these really know the people within their areas. We also have a group that we call the task force members. These are influential people within the community. These include religious leaders, the local leaders, people who really have influence and know their communities so well, and they have access to these young people. Yes.
And the main question, the role digitalization plays in access to education. Expand more on that question.
Yeah, when it comes to that, we very well know that digitalization is something that brings people closer. Look at the COVID-19 pandemic where everyone was meant to stay home. No one is supposed to move. So how do we have children being connected to their teachers who they can no longer meet physically? And we feel like this can be done through digitalization. And I really feel that when children are given an opportunity, this is somewhere where they can be able to relate with even their peers that they are going to take long without seeing. But these are people that have been really helping them to push through their life, sharing their experiences. So if they are given chance to connect through digitalization, it is a way of them being able to have someone to speak to. We very well know that our parents are quite busy. We are all busy parents who leave home very early in the morning and come back late in the evening. So with these children having an opportunity to connect with their teachers and fellow pupils online, it is an opportunity for them to have someone to share with whatever is really happening to them, even in the moment when the parents are not around at home.
Of course, access would be guaranteed for those coming from well-to-do families who can buy these gadgets and are able to get data to get online and interact with these teachers. Another contestation pertains to the fact that even the teachers themselves, some of whom cannot even use computers, some can't even operate an email. So you do have teachers that need to be reoriented in ICT skills. So
Yes.
largely, don't you think talking about or touting the significance of digitalization of the education sector can only go a long way in widening the gap that has been even increasing in this country?
I really feel you're right. We even have parents who have gadgets but are not really sure of how to use these gadgets apart from calling and maybe sending a text. That is if they can even do that. But not many of them even know that they can access their emails through the gadgets. So it is really challenging if we expect our parents or these people to be the ones to support these children to use these gadgets. And even in this era where we have gadgets being quite expensive, you find that a parent could have one gadget if they have it. So if the parent is at work, how are we expecting this child to be able to get to continue with their studies? It is either the parent leaving the gadget at home or maybe moving with the child, which is also going to be very much inconveniencing.
When we talk about increasing inequalities, we are alluding to the fact that those learners in the rural areas have not access to these technological advancements or gadgets. And those in the urban areas have been largely able to access these gadgets, access online learning. So the big contestation here is that digitalization has only widened the gap between the rich and the poor. Do you agree? And how do we reduce that gap?
I will agree to an extent, yes, because the learners in the rural areas are really left out. Maybe they are left out to listen out to radios, that is if they can really afford these radios, because we've been in one area in Busia where we were looking at parents and encouraging them to allow their learners or to give them access to radio, and the parents were like, how are we going to purchase the dry cells when we do not even have food on our tables?
I see.
Yes. So there is quite a big challenge that we really need to work on for us to bridge that gap.
Indeed. I agree. Let's also bring in Tobias Abasa, Information Technology Officer, coming in from Kabale Local District. Now, Tobias, we are talking about inculcating ICT infrastructure in a country that is only having 40% internet penetration. As of July 1st, we did see an institution of new taxes levied on airtime and data, 12% tax on data and airtime. Largely, the efforts to integrate ICT into the infrastructure of many districts within this country, how are those efforts moving along? What are some of the challenges you've encountered?
Thank you, moderator. As you have said, my name is Tobias Abasa, Information Technology Officer of Kabale District. It is found in southwestern Uganda. As we talk of digital transformation, the challenges we are having specifically in regard to education. You see, the government has not yet done much to extend the ICT infrastructure, especially to the rural communities. For example, you find that now we have NITA, which is trying to extend the backbone so that people are able to access internet. But basically it is targeting these areas around the town, like universities, like the hospitals, and the district. But it has not gone down to these rural schools to provide such services, which becomes a big challenge. And these rural schools, most of them do not even have connectivity to power. The teachers, most of them, they don't have devices which can access internet, and those who have them, they are not even able to use them to enable them conduct online learning. So you find most of these, like my district, we have not yet done much sensitize the stakeholders who should be who are engaged in education. So you find...
Tobias, forgive me for interrupting you, but since there is social distancing, you can remove the mask. It's stifling your ability to speak.
Thank you.
All right, Tobias.
So now I was talking about the challenges we are having in digital transformation.
Indeed.
We look at these rural communities are not yet connected to the backbone, the NITA backbone infrastructure, which is providing internet. And we are looking at the issue of connectivity to power, where maybe the students can have access to these TVs, radios. So you find most of them in the rural areas, they are not in the know what is taking place. Because most of the times you find these learning activities go on these radios, TVs, but most of these people in the villages, they are not able to access
the information. The government had hatched a plan to distribute 9 million radios and 130,000 TV sets that did not materialize because Parliament did not approve 336 billion Uganda shillings. But that is what they had intended to do to solve that issue. But you as Kabale local government, what are you doing now to address that challenge?
Now, as the local government, we are trying to encourage teachers who have these devices, the smartphones, those who can be trained to use like U-lesson. But the biggest challenge still remains if you can do what? Use those devices, the computers, a few of them can use. So it's a big challenge. And ICT being a new sector in government, it has not been appreciated much. The role of ICT has not been appreciated in local government. We are still developing the policies on how to use the ICT to transform our societies. So we have not yet reached deep into the rural communities, basing on the fact that Kabale district, most of the communities are rural. compared to the urban
Indeed.
setting.
So Tobias, if we are saying, courtesy of the President and his communique yesterday, that we should be reopening educational institutions and the whole economy by January of 2022, and according to the factors you're giving us right now, it seems like the local districts are not ready to actually reopen education institutions with the inculcation of ICT put in mind. Don't you think this is going to be a huge problem, hampering a sustainable reopening of our education sectors, in that many schools might do away with online learning and call for the convention of physical learning that might lead to the exacerbation of COVID-19 spread, hence a lockdown?
I think most of the schools will go back at the traditional way of teaching.
I see.
Especially for these lower levels, the primary level. At least for university. For the university, at least I see most of the students can conduct on learning sessions. But for these lower levels, the primary and the secondary, I don't think they will be able to use on learning sessions.
Go ahead, Tobias. That is a recipe for disaster, isn't it?
Yes, those are some of the challenges, but the opportunities I see, at least the internet is in the reach in the Kabale district. We only need to have government which can advocate for wider coverage to all these communities. And the other challenge is about putting too much tax on internet access. You see, most of the people fear to buy bundles to access because they say if I put 1,000, it is depleted in a few seconds. So most of the people have even run away from using the internet because of that fact of high cost of data purchase.
All right. So would you advocate for the removal of the same tax?
I hope so.
Tobias. All right. Let me talk to Patrick Tumwine. Patrick, let's also interrogate the challenges which might be better solved offline. Right now we're talking about or touting the significance of, digitalization of the education sector. But what are some of the other challenges we could be in a better position to solve off the internet?
Thank you very much. I think there's more that could be done beyond internet. I think we're talking about offline learning, for example, materials distribution. How much he tells you one of the things that in Kabale they are not in position to reach out to everyone. So there are those who will be left behind, definitely. But how is it that we deal with the issue of leaving no one behind? And so there are different mechanisms that could be done to ensure that no one is left behind through distribution. I think there was probably a budget which was allocated to ensure that there's printing of materials, distribution of materials to the children, the most vulnerable, the people who cannot even have access to a phone or computer or even a radio. So there's a lot that could be done. Probably that can address the issue. And he raised a very fundamental issue of taxes. I think there's more. I think for me, to him as government, he should speak as government, local government of Kabale. For me, my question would be to him, what deliberate effort has Kabale local government made to ensure that there is continued learning of the children in those schools? Is it possible that there is a budget allocation for e-learning in those schools? Is there a deliberate effort by the local government that something has to be done by the people who cannot be able to read, to use these gadgets we're talking about? Thank you.
And of course, let me also bring in Irene Nakakande. Irene Nakakande, let's talk about the high levels of teacher attrition. We're talking about the trainers abandoning the profession. Are you afraid that we might end up reopening educational institutions but not have enough teachers to teach our learners? And another thing, many of them had abandoned the profession. Others had veered into border riding, frying chapatis. The informal sector was abuzz with teachers, so many of whom might not be actually coming back into the fold of the education sector. Are you worried that we might end up reopening minus having enough trainers? And even the trainers that we could be left with might not be having enough information when it comes to ICT. Many can't operate a computer and so forth. Let's talk about such challenges.
Yes, thank you, moderator. I think I would really mention that I'm also a teacher.
Indeed.
Who last did my teaching in 2009. We really grew up when we were told teachers are too many, the teaching profession is too crowded, And in years to come, you would hear no one wanting to join the teaching profession because they knew teachers are flooding everywhere, and maybe the call was on for teachers who are teaching science subjects. So when it comes to the situation now, COVID-19, we find that teachers really were people who are really, I would say, lost hope. I would call it like losing hope, because this was a situation where no one knew when schools will open and no one really knew what is coming up next. Of course, for the first pandemic, there was some hope that schools would reopen and teachers gained some kind of hope, but then after just like an operation of 1 month, the schools were closed again. So you find that someone knew, of course they've known this pandemic came in the first place in 2020, it lasted for some good months, and if it is hitting again, then no one knows when it's going to end. You find that teachers really had to resort to an alternative way of earning. Many have dropped out into the informal sector like you mentioned, and some are really appreciating those other sectors. Many are really not wanting to come back. I come from this area of out of town, those ends of Gayaza. It's kind of semi-rural.
Yes.
So you find that a number of teachers have gone into brick making, they've gone into farming, and they feel this is really earning even more than the education sector where they are, and many are really not having any hopes of coming back. So we really need to find out and plan better. If we are to reopen schools, we need to find out how many teachers do we still have that are really interested, and how can we really increase their motivation, because even before we had issues of them being motivated to take on this job very well. So how are we motivating them to come back to teach our learners, and how are we going to sensitize them on using ICT? Because I've had sessions and trainings of teachers, but in many of them we found out that a number of them do not even have email addresses. So you find that they also need sensitization on the use of ICT. And we need to do this earlier before we even think of reopening of schools.
And of course, retooling, even the teachers that we have left, some of them can't even operate a computer. So how would such a trainer be able to pass on or disseminate this information among the learners if they also don't have it? Aren't you worried that this is a challenge?
Yeah.
Go ahead. How big of this is it a challenge?
It's quite a big challenge, because we find that in most of the urban schools, well, some of the urban schools do have access to computers. There are computer labs, but even in a school where I went, it's very in an urban setting. I think I managed to sit onto a computer like once throughout my 6 years of studying there. So when we look at schools in the urban setting, schools in the semi-urban, and those in the rural setting, do we even have those ICT gadgets there? Because this could be the biggest challenge of why teachers are having limited knowledge and skills into using these ICT gadgets. Do these gadgets even exist in the schools where we are going to operate? And if they are, who is there that has trained the skills that is able to pass them on to these teachers? We really need to invest more in ICT for our schools, and to also sensitize or train our teachers on using these gadgets for them to be able to pass over this information to our children.
Tobias Abasa, what is the jurisdiction of Kabale doing to ensure that the teachers within Kabale are retooled or reoriented with ICT skills, and also issues to do with the expansion of structures in educational facilities to ensure that SOPs are adhered to when we reopen in January?
Thank you. In regard to retooling, I think the district now will have to look at the issue of the effect this pandemic has caused, then how it can try to live, to promote the use of ICT in these schools. I think sort of this problem, I see each school should at least have a computer lab, and I see this one is being done only in secondary schools, but it should be widened to the primary level, and then they should look at employing ICT teachers in primary schools, which can help these learners and their fellow staff.
Go ahead. Isn't it wishful thinking, Tobias? The fact that we haven't put in place this infrastructure and we are reopening in January an education sector that is largely going to be focusing on a transition to ICT.
Well, it may not be wishful thinking because these schools have budgets. Like buying a computer which can cost like 2.5 million, that one can be realistic. It's about the district encouraging these schools to at least own computers in their respective schools, the head teachers, to look at a way of they can get some funding from the capitation grants.
Here's why there could be a big problem, Tobias Abasa. Many of the many of the education institutions in this country are run by private institutions. 58% of the primary schools in this country, 61% rather, are run by private institutions. 58% of the secondary schools are run by private actors. The 52 universities that we have in Uganda here, majority are being run by private institutions. So in the respect of Kabale, you do have so many primary, secondary schools that are largely run by private institutions, many of whom were grappling with loans, and that distress led to many of them closing shop, meaning many of these schools will not be reopening by January of 2022, even though the president gives us the green light. As a local government in Kabale, what are you doing to help these private institutions to actually ensure that they are also brought on board when we reopen in January?
Actually, private schools are embracing the use of ICT compared to government schools.
What we are saying is many of them shut down. They couldn't pay loans. They sold off these premises, turned them into hotels, accommodation centers, and so forth, meaning we might not have these players joining the education sector in January. What are you doing as a government to help them come back into the fold?
I think for the government to help them, they should look at subsidizing on the tax they pay. They can extend, help these schools to access loans so that they are able to reopen again when the time comes for reopening. They can talk to these financial institutions, they extend credit to them, and they forge a way forward. It's not that these credit institutions will give them free money, but the government can, or the district can engage them on how to access these cheap loans. And the problem we are having, the district has not yet embraced the use of ICT in these institutions. So it will become a challenge to say the little time we have that the district will come in to help these institutions to remain a challenge. So we need enough time to sit and rethink on how to help these institutions.
Time that we do not have. Patrick, you do understand how dire this situation is. You are compelling a school that largely did shut down because of loans, distress, and we are telling them you need to be buying computers to inculcate ICT. So if largely I'm shut down because of rent, because maybe I was grappling with some arrears, how will I be inculcating ICT infrastructure on my premises that are non-existent?
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to say that much as there are challenges, the digitalization also comes along with opportunities, which we need to interrogate further to ensure that how do we use and take advantage of that digitalization. And I think it's important that, for me, when I hear a colleague from Kabale local government, of course it's government, and therefore the government, the Kabale local government should be discussing budgeting, planning to ensure that they embrace this digitalization, to ensure that their schools are well equipped. We are talking about hotspots in Kabale towns, identify small towns, small centers, set up hotspots and villages. So this should be an opportunity for planning by the government, and local government, I think, cannot be excused on this. It is about the mindset, it's about rethinking, it's about the strategizing, it's about looking forward and taking advantage of the circumstances, but also providing and ensuring that this happens. I did say in my introduction on set is that the pandemic is here. It has provided challenges, but there are also opportunities. It's here to stay. It's not about to leave. And therefore, we need to rethink the old way of thinking. Things have changed. And therefore, the playing ground is completely different. How dynamic are we? And how effective are we able to cope up with the current environment and look better and look different, but also do things differently from the way we've been doing things? Thank you. Yeah, I think the cover the local government, please. The floor is yours.
Thank you, my colleague, for that technical input. I think we needed to engage with my entity about how to promote the use of ICT. Like because now we are in the budgeting process. I think I will submit in my proposals on how to improve the ICT in these institutions, because we cannot do away without education. So in the coming budget process, I'll try to lobby and see if the district can put some money to run the ICT or to promote the ICT.
And of course, Tobias, we cannot wait for the next budget reading. We do have a reopening by January of 2022, so meaning it's a recipe for disaster. Not that we want to be the bearers of bad news, but then right now we should be putting in place the measures that will help us ensure a sustainable reopening of the education sector by January of 2022, and not talking about budgets and so forth. So government needs to look for the money between now and December to ensure a safe and sustainable reopening in January of 2022, because if you go back to the conventional way of doing things, physically having students or learners throwing these educational institutions minus social distancing being expedited, there's going to be a third wave. And the third wave would mean a lockdown and a closure of the educational institutions again. So funding is not a conversation, it's a requisite or requirement that we need to fully reopen by January of 2022. Let me bring in an economist, that is an educationist, Maxwell Odongo, currently working for the National Planning Authority as Plan Education and Skills Development. Is going to be joining us online. Maxwell Odongo, a very good morning. We've been talking about the challenges that are dogging or dampening the resolve of many of the leaders to actually expedite that transition to ICT. But what kind of opportunities could be grabbed from this digitalization of the education sector? Maxwell, thank you for joining us. Good morning. Maxwell Odongo?
Yes, please.
Yes, a very good morning to you, sir.
Thank you so much.
Okay, largely we've been talking about the challenges of the digitalization of the education sector, but then largely what can you divulge as far as opportunities are concerned? Maxwell. Maxwell Odongo?
Yes, I've lost you. Can you please come again? You can hear me?
Yes, Maxwell, let's talk about the opportunities we could grab from this venture where we are trying to transition the conventional way of doing things as far as education is concerned, the transition to the digitalization of the education sector. What are some of the opportunities that we could grab at this opportune moment?
Well, thank you so much. The intervention of COVID-19 into the education sector taught us a very good lesson that we really need to learn in a hard way going forward. Well, of course, as a country, we have to think in terms of how we can convert challenges into opportunities. First of all, I must say that in terms of internet coverage across the country, we are already at about 80%. And of course, this is a right time we really need to invest heavily in digital transformation.
Maxwell, did you say, Maxwell, sorry for interrupting, did you say our internet penetration is now at 80%?
At 80%.
Not 40%? We are getting information that our internet penetration is only at 40%, not 80.
In terms of, okay, all right, thank you for that correction. In terms of signal strength, probably we could talk about 40%. But when we look at it from the perspective of coverage, I think we are more than that. I've just been browsing through some of the statistics on internet coverage, and it's giving me that kind of information. So we have a series of opportunities in terms of investment in digital transformation. As a National Planning Authority, we have made series of proposals on this, and it's already embedded in NDP3. So going forward, we shall do a lot of investment in digitalizing the country. At secondary school level, tertiary and primary school level, well, public universities and private universities have taken that serious, and currently a lot of lectures are being conducted online. Now, there are a series of opportunities at secondary school level, yes, in the sense that ICT is one of the course or one of the subjects currently being offered at secondary school. And I'm pretty sure that secondary schools have ICT teachers, meaning that if we want to scale up digitalization of education, we already have the human resources who can actually fast track or can push this agenda forward. The only challenge we have as of now is in the primary school. Most of the teachers are not really well conversant with ICT related world. But of course, looking at it from the urban perspective, I think majority of the teachers in urban settings are fairly endowed with these skills. But when we go down to the rural, that's where the problem is. And we need to invest a lot in training human resources, indeed, to ensure that these skills and also the infrastructures are scaled down in the rural setting. For now, I think that's Maxwell, I could say.
Is 2 months enough
maybe,
time for us
just
to
join in, and as the discussion proceeds, maybe I will be able to come in again.
Maxwell, the time frame we've given ourselves as a country, 2 months, November and December, is it enough time to actually train human resource in ICT so that we ensure a safe reopening that is sustainable by January of 2022? 2 months, is it enough time? All right, Maxwell Odongo, an educationist and economist working with the National Planning Authority. Patrick Tumwini, largely November and December, those 2 months, is it enough time to train human resource, those are the teachers, and also the learners in ICT to ensure a safe reopening by January? Let's talk about the feasibility of that.
Thank you very much. First of all, it's about the mindset, it's about preparedness, it's about commitment, it's about acceptance that this is the reality we are living in. Indeed. And this is the situation we must deal with, and therefore the state has a critical role to play in all this. And so for me, it is not about is it possible, is it realistic. It's once there's commitment and there's will, this will happen. It's very possible. But the issue is, you heard yesterday that the entire economy, total opening will be come January. Everything will be totally opened. And so as we open up totally the economy, we should also be open up to be ready and prepared for everything. And I think for me, the other question to Maxwell, if he's online, is about how effective is it if you're talking about internet access to everyone in a community, but also we're talking about taxes, increment, and double standard. How effective will this happen? How do we give and don't take? We're talking about internet access, universal access by everyone, but also talking affordability. How effective and who will afford this?
And that's why during my preamble I did pose a question. In your preamble, while we were diverging a few details to set the stage for this conversation, I did ask whether there is good political will to go ahead and implement measures that will go away to ensure continued learning. You do have a tax on data. 12%, July. They've never gone back to discuss this issue. They've never gone back to say, okay, this is going to go a long way in dampening our resolve to transition from conventional ways of doing things all the way to ICT. We still do have a 12% tax on data. So such factors would actually go a long way in dampening the resolve of many to ensure this very, very great critical transition to the digitalization of the education sector. Largely, you're still watching NTV Uganda. My name is Rome Busiku. In my midst, I do have Patrick Tumwine, Maxwell Odongo, Irene Nakakande, Tobias Habasa, and also Becca Birukuja. Becca hasn't spoken with us, but after this short break, he will be divulging more details on your personal data protection. That's a conversation we shall be having shortly after this break. Keep it here. Welcome back, and many thanks for staying with us right here on NTV Uganda. My name is Rome Busik. Of course, we are still continuing with this very pertinent conversation, the COVID-19 pandemic and its effect on the education sector. We want to talk about the opportunities and challenges of digitalization. Did the pandemic only boost, yes, the ability of many people to actually maximize on the power of the internet, or is it only pushing more inequalities taking center stage within our jurisdiction, Uganda? And what can be done to actually limit the widening gap between the rich and the poor? Rich can actually attain the technological advancements and gadgets that they need to continue their learning on the internet, but those who are poor have largely been left behind. Yes, we cannot only talk about the challenges, but also the opportunities that we could grab as a result of the digitalization of the education sector. I have Patrick Tumwine, I have Irene Nakakande, I have Tobias Abasa, Baker Birikuja will also be joining us later on. Maxwell Odongo from the National Planning Authority is also joining us online, and he shall be divulging more details in that regard. Well, let's move on with this conversation. Irene Nakakande, very good morning once again. Let's talk about the challenges we could handle offline as far as digitalization is concerned. What are some of those challenges you feel can be handled offline? Even though I'm in Gulu, there is no internet, I want to continue with my learning, I could expedite measure X or B.
Okay, the challenges that I feel we can handle offline.
Without the internet.
Without internet. One is to motivate our teachers, like I mentioned earlier. Our teachers are quite demotivated. They need some kind of motivation. So if we do motivate them, then we know that we have, we know that we shall have the teaching profession available for our children to continue learning. And then also, we need to look at our schools. We look at the infrastructure to allow for the COVID-19 measures, the social distancing. We do have a number of pupils, very many pupils crowded in the different classrooms that we have. How do we ensure social distance within our classes? How do we ensure that there are facilities for hand washing? How do we ensure sanitization for our children while they're at school? Do we have available the health workers for them to provide the emergency care in case something happens? Yes, I feel we really need to handle those before we think of reopening of the schools.
Go ahead.
Okay, I also feel that we need to have, like I mentioned, the infrastructure. The teachers need a lot for them to do the teaching. Is everything that the teachers need available? For example, talk about the chalk that the teachers need, the field charts, everything, the textbooks. Is that all in place for the teachers to do their kind of work that they are supposed to do?
I see.
Yeah, we need to empower the teachers, we need to do retooling, but also to provide the needed infrastructure that they need to do their job very well.
I was talking to the Vice Chancellor, UNICAF University, that is George William, and he told me we could purchase iPads for every learner in this country, and I was telling him we tried that with the radios and TV sets. It didn't materialize. And he was saying it's only 261 billion Uganda shillings that is needed. Is it feasible? Do you think government can actually buy these iPads for these learners? Is it a feasible target?
It's
Another
not.
dream.
No, it's not, because even when you look at the different schools, how many of the schools do have 1 or 2 computers available that are even working? Because you could have a computer lab that is kind of theoretical. None of the computers are really working well. So we still have a long way to go for us to achieve that.
And some subjects are really practical. They sound subjects: biology, physics, chemistry. Online learning won't be able to help big time when it comes to the practicability teaching of these subjects. How do you plan to go around that?
The practical subjects?
Yes, biology, physics, chemistry. Imagine you're on Zoom and someone is trying to teach you these subjects that are meant to be practical and might require physicality of the learners.
Of course, when it comes to some of the subjects that require chemicals, I don't know, this is really going to be very, very hard, because
Indeed.
you will not have these learners having access to these chemicals, and if they do, how are they protected for them to use these chemicals at home? So it's kind of challenging.
Tobias Abasa, Kawale Local Government District, do we have the firewall, the requisite firewall that we need to deal with cyber attacks, just in case we make that full transition to digitalization of the education sector, to protect ourselves from cyber attacks, issues to do with exam malpractice, Amelana in Gulu? How do they even stop me from cheating?
I think the firewall may be there, but still there are challenges to online learning. Like you're conducting a lesson, you keep on having those funny messages, you get the add-ins, and with ICT, all the time people are trying to hack into people's information. They do the coding for you, may not be there, but at the back end, somebody is seated, try to code C, gets your information, you're not in the know. Finally, you find the information you're sending is already going somewhere. You can send some information, like, for example, to a university, you find all the information is already distorted. You find the marks which are reaching there are totally different from what you're getting from the student. So I think there's a big challenge there, and we need to develop strong systems which can help us solve these issues of cyber attacks.
Indeed.
And that will need some expertise. Unfortunately, we have not employed most of these technical people who can mitigate those challenges.
And of course, we can't wait for a budget again.
And we can't wait for the budget. But the ritual that is there, I think we need to do much mobilization. We use the ritual that is there. We go to these institutions and try to engage them to see how to move on. We shall not wait until we get the budget support. We can use the ritual that is there, then as a beginning, as some even come in. Unfortunately, there are some organizations which are supporting the government in terms of so many things, including the ICT, which have been denied they are not allowed to operate again in Uganda.
I see.
That one also becomes another challenge we are having. And the government cannot able do this thing alone without the development partners.
Of course, Tobias is talking about the shrinking civic specs, the fact that in August of this very year, 54 NGOs were shut down because of a few issues here and there by the NGO Bureau. Now, many of these NGOs were involved in advancing educational services to many of the learners within this country. By shutting them down, isn't the government shooting itself in the leg, if you will? Now, Tobias, let's talk about another issue. I was in Kabale. That was in December 2020. We were doing a People's Parliament, and at the time we were talking about teenage pregnancies. They were kept at around 8,000 by December. By February of 2021, you did have some 5,000 additional teenage pregnancies, totaling 13,000 if you're to add the bulk from December. So meaning, even though there are challenges with ICT integration, it is the magic bullet that we need to ensure continued learning, or else we shall have more young girls actually falling prey to these vice of teenage pregnancies and also early marriages, child labor, if you will. So let's talk about or tout the significance of ICT to help these young learners get integrated back into the education system.
I think the ICT will help these girls, and not only the girls.
And the boys too.
Even the boys. You find that these boys who have either impregnated these young girls or they are there. You find families are saying, now you have impregnated my daughter, you must marry the girl. So the boys also have the challenge. I think we need to put a mechanism of how to reach these boys in their homes. We can engage the parents to always give them some data, give them phones, those who are able to, so that they can access these education, these platforms where they can interact with the teachers. And we encourage the teachers to reach out to these younger boys and girls. If the school is open and you had a number of children, most of them have not come, can put a mechanism of making a follow-up and knowing why are these people not coming back at school? What is the problem? If you find the child is interested in going back at school, but by the fact that she or he is engaged in those marital affairs, then we see how to bring them back on board.
So would you advocate for the free issuance of educational grants to many of these learners that might not be having the school fees to get back into the educational fold when we were open in January? Educational grants? Very
much so. Because these children, they are already traumatized. Even their parents some will be demoralized to pay back the school fees. If we put incentives of them going back at school at maybe a cheap cost, or like we say, you can access free education, they will be encouraged to go back at school.
All right. All right, I have Becca Birikuja, who is online. That is wonderful news. Very good morning, Mr. Becca Birikuja. Thank you for joining us. Becca has been a practicing advocate for over 6 years with experience in a number of areas, largely on compliance and regulatory matters in the information technology sector. So this is someone who comes with a wealth of information. He is currently the manager, licensing and legal affairs at the Personal Data Protection Office, a role which enables him to provide regulatory oversight to activities related to data protection and privacy. A very good morning once again, Becca Birikuja. Thank you for joining us. Becca? Yes, Becca. Good morning to you. Indeed. Let me shoot straight to the $64,000 question, Birikuja. What role do security and safety play in the field of education? We want to know more in terms of grading and student records, etc., and also averting exam malpractices.
Thank you very much. It's a very critical role, considering that, with the pandemic, most of the schooling and instruction has gone online. The students receiving the instruction, but then also now with so many exams and assignments being done online, and also the results provided. So how security plays is that, one, starting from the online classes, the educators and the schools should be aware that even then, much as these are students, their privacy, both of the environment in which they are in, should also be respected. But also not forgetting that these being students, they are living in homes with their parents, so students should be advised that they should probably be in a room or a place that actually does not violate the privacy of even their parents or their guardians. But the other, it also relates to recording the information. As you may be aware, in the ordinary setting, a student just walks in class, maybe they take record of those that have attended, and then they are learning instruction, and it's only kept possibly with the class teacher and also the school in their records. But now with online, this information can be made available to almost anyone, how someone has actually performed, their level of performance, and the help they may need. So as the Personal Data Protection Office, we are advising that schools should have a policy surrounding security and data protection, knowing that, and the teachers trained, that when a student is graded, this information should be kept in a particular way. If they're using machines or equipment such as laptops which they own, there should be still proper safeguards of where this information should be kept. But even then, the education has also taken up the ability of, recording the attendance, like I've talked about, but then the student's name. So information, let's say someone poorly records whatever that is attributable to, let's say, the parent or the child. Data protection gives rights to people whose information is collected, that they can actually reach out to this person to request them, correct this. Now, going online, specifically with education, schools already have processes in place in which a student can ask details about themselves to be corrected.
Right.
But online, there's been a challenge. One, verifying that actually if the person asking is the guardian, or at home it's very easy, could be a sibling, say, but I actually think maybe they should add this, your name shouldn't be spelled that way. So those safeguards should also be put in place. But most importantly, with students being given these devices, they can, and most especially the internet, they can visit any website. These are still children, they should be guided and put safeguards in place, now going back to the parents and guardians, ensuring that actually you limit and restrict what they can visit or read at that particular point in time. We have campaigns where we are helping teachers. We've been having meetings with Ministry of Education to come up with guidelines which are easy to understand, knowing that this topic of data protection and privacy and security, for that matter, is a bit abstract to to the general public.
What are those guidelines? Baker, what are those guidelines? I believe we've lost Baker Birikuja. Well, he comes with a wealth of information in that regard. Mr. Patrick Tumini, what are some of the vices that our learners are exposed to when they try to venture into the spheres of the internet, the dark internet? What are some of the vices they are exposed to? Issues to do with pornography and so forth.
Thank you very much. Of course, this internet and usage of online learning and the rest has come along with very many opportunities, but also with very many challenges, which you have said. One is our children and our young learners have been introduced to a complete new whole set of system. I can tell you, look at the age category. Of course, it varies from age category to age category. You have children who are in nursery, primary, up to say P1, P2, and then you are telling these children to actually go online and learn. One, without supervision, where their parents have no time or the guardian has no time. You're talking about these learners exposing so many other things. There are very many other things. So in the end, if they're not monitored, if they're not prepared, if they're not advised by the other learners, you actually find you're losing it. You're not really achieving what you want to. But I think one of the panelists did mention the category of ages varies. There are those in secondary school, there are those at university who have reached certain advanced age, which e-learning has become very easy for them. They're able to cope up, but also there's a lot of guidance that is needed. Others have been exposed to so many things, hacking into the system, but also pornographic materials, which you did say out there is a lot that is out there. And so without the guidance of the guardians and the parents, but also we need to have started having a conversation on the legal framework, the whole policy framework around those issues that we need to prepare. This pandemic fell into the country with a lot of unpreparedness, and the whole world is totally in shock, and others are learning. What do we do? How do we deal with this situation? And so that has to do a lot of planning and thinking, and for me, both parents, the duty bearers, as well as the rights holders, all have a role to play into this. All of us, everyone has a responsibility on what contribution do we make, how do we ensure that the children continue learning without such a kind of hindrance that will, in the end, if not handled very well, you can actually lose the children instead of preparing them for learning. So there's a lot more that could be done in that line.
And also the issue of exam malpractices. Yeah,
that is also another thing. I think for me it is the whole learning education system. We have to really, as a country, a lot of rethinking, revamping. How best do we now, as a country, prepare? We have had enough time to actually prepare for this. And we're not moving back. Things have changed. We must accept and live within the realities of what it is now. And therefore, a lot has to be done from our duty bearers as well as the rights holders to ensure that the learning continues, but also to ensure that there is protection, but also to ensure that there is preparedness, and accepting that this is the reality, the new normal, as it's called.
Indeed.
Setting, then we must learn to live with it, but without losing the children or the learners.
All right, that is Patrick Chumwine, a representative from GIZ. Let me also bring in our panelists online. Maxwell Odongo, are you still with us? Maxwell Odongo or Baker Birikuje would like to talk about whether or not the COVID-19 pandemic is a blessing in disguise that will go a long way in helping us boost the digitalization of the education sector. Now the question is it actually helping us boost the education sector, or is it actually doing the opposite, enforcing more inequalities? Maxwell Odongo.
Thank you so much. COVID-19 has come in force. At the beginning, we saw it come as a curse for education sector. But sooner or later, you get to realize that with the kind of adaptation measures that we are currently taking as a country, the whole thing is turning out to be a blessing, and if we continue to handle it critically, probably in the long run, we shall develop some kind of resilience for any disaster or any pandemic that is yet to come. You get to realize that currently, much as there's already a digital kind of divide across all systems, especially the urban and the rural setting, and also the fact that digitalization have left out a few, especially the poor. But on the side of those who have the capacity to afford the technology, things are almost normal, because classes are going on, assessments are going on, and the only thing we need to do as a country is to take a deliberate action to bring those who are left behind on board. Looking at how tertiary institutions have taken it up, it is almost 100% that almost all universities are now running these programs, their academic programs online. Meaning that if we scale up investment, in the ICT, in technology, and we take a deliberate or a joint measure to bring even those who are marginalized by technology, then we are even good to go. Now, there are few anomalies that we really need to fix. One, in the area of curriculum. You know, curriculum starts with design, then it goes down to implementations,
Right.
up to evaluation. Currently, the biggest chunk of the problem is how we can evaluate our learners online. Of course, you have talked about malpractice and so many other issues related to data protections, and we need to think around together. And if we can only sort out assessment, then of course now the design of the curriculum and implementation, those are very easy things. Teaching can actually be done online. We only need to deal with the assessment issues. And of course now, looking at the trend which most developed countries have taken, exams are not, taking a case in point, countries like Finland, they don't dwell so much on examination related issues. What matters is actually the learning outcome. At the end of it all, we need to be able to put on mechanism to realize that the learning outcome at each and every stage is achieved, irrespective of the scores. In Uganda, we tend to bulldoze our learners with a lot of exams and so forth. No. The most critical thing that we need to fight hard to address as of now is the aspect of equity.
I see.
The rest can actually be handled later. We are forcing a lot of circumstances coming in, especially in the area of enrollment. We need a deliberate action to ensure that we re-enroll. We need to advocate for re-enrollment. Because when you look at the scenario that happened sometimes back around 1997 in Liberia, when Ebola actually hit the country, it was actually discovered that when schools reopened, about 40% of the school-going children did not return to school. And of course now Uganda have taken 2 years without a face-to-face kind of learning. Children have been at home. And so we need a deliberate action to ensure that we re-enroll our children in school, and that would take a lot of advocacy. And this is not only the role of the government, the civil societies, the non-governmental organization, including the church, and the clan system have to come in to ensure that our children goes back to school 100% when schools open. Of course, now we need to think about possibility of ensuring social distancing and other things. So that would also call upon all the stakeholders to ensure that we really invest in infrastructures or including temporary structures to ensure that learning actually progressed. Over to you.
Maxwell Odongo, I do have the representative of Kabale local government, Tobias. And Tobias is telling us that many of the education institutions within his jurisdiction of Kabale might be forced to go back to the conventional way of learning, meaning they might not be able to inculcate ICT infrastructure into their curriculum. Large and fair, what are some of the ramifications that might be birthed out of this? Maxwell? We seem to have lost Maxwell Odongo. Let's bring in...
I beg your pardon, sir.
Yes, Maxwell, I'm having here Tobias Epasa. He is the Information Technology Officer of Kabale District, and he was telling us many of the education institutions within Kabale have been unable to inculcate ICT infrastructure within their curriculum, and many might go back to the conventional way of learning, meaning physical learning within their institutions. What could be the immediate ramifications of that happening? Failure to transition.
If they're unable to integrate ICT, then the immediate intervention is to ensure that the aspect of social, the standard operating system should be adequately implemented. And that would actually call for investment in health-related kind of structures, and that would entail, first of all, in the classroom setting, that we need to put a lot in place to ensure that the social distancing, there's adequate sanitization, and of course the hygiene around the school settings needs to be worked on adequately. And of course it comes a lot. It comes a lot with the resource envelope, Indeed. Which currently, especially in the private school setting, may really be difficult to attain that kind of resources. Indeed. So there has been a series of proposals of the possibility of waiving some loans, especially for those schools that are heavily indebted, or even expansion of repayment periods and so forth, yes. to lessen the burden of loans on private schools. We have heard our president talks about this. Currently, of course, as National Planning Authority, we have made proposals to Uganda Development Bank to also give some low-interest loans to proprietors of private schools, so that when schools open, their operation is kind of lessened in terms of the burdens that requires finances and so forth. So in summary, what actually needs to be done is to create an environment that facilitates learning and also takes care of all the standard operating procedures Indeed. That are spelled out by Minister of Health. And in that, by doing so, we are sure of safety, we are sure of continuity, and we are sure that the third wave of the pandemic will be accounted for. And
all right, Maxwell. Now, Maxwell, so, we have two sets of learners within this country. We have two sets of learners, Maxwell Odongo, within this country, those who were able to continue with their education online. My father is rich, my mother is rich, so somehow I could get an iPad, computer, if you will, laptop to go ahead with my continued learning. You have another set of learner from maybe Chazanga, Gulu, and I was unable to purchase these technological advancements to ensure continued learning. So large and fair, you have two sets of learners, those who have continued since March of 2020 with their education somewhat. Then you do have those ones who haven't received any kind of information or educational services since March of 2020. As you reopen, or as you clamor for a full reopening of educational institutions in January of 2022, how do you bridge that gap to ensure that those who did not catch up on online lessons actually are at par with those who continued with their learning? Maxwell Odongo.
There are several strategies that can actually be employed to ensure that the gap between those who have been learning and those who were off completely,
for example,
bridged. First of all, we really need to condense the curriculum.
I see.
To include only the core content. The core content that can actually be covered within the shortest time possible. Let me just take, for instance, if you're teaching economics, you can just focus on maybe the core principles of demand and supply, and the rest of application can actually be left out. These are catch-up measures, kind of. Now, we also discovered that in Uganda's setting, exams, evaluation tends to take hold of the whole thing. Find that every weekend or right from Friday through the weekend, our children are sitting for exams. So one of the critical recommendations that I can actually give to ensure that the catch-up strategy is implemented is to scale down on the rate of assessment and implore possibility of using like a Saturday to conduct some lessons. So lessons can actually run from Monday up to Saturday, and in that way, we are also capable, teachers are capable of covering the whole term kind of content within the shortest time possible. And of course, I would also implore that schools adopt to technology like use of projector, use of PowerPoint, instead of using chalkboard during teaching, they can actually acquire projectors and do PowerPoint. And in that case, I think much content can actually be covered within the shortest time possible. Then finally, I would talk about shortening holidays. Our holidays is normally 1.5 or even 2 months. It can actually be reduced to 2 weeks to offer ample time for more content to be covered. Thank you so much.
All right, Maurice Maxwell Odongo, thank you very much indeed. It will be very callous to have many of these online learners promoted at the expense of those who do not actually go through these online lessons. Because if you're going to set an exam, chances are those who did get an education through online platforms will be able to pass those exams. But if I was unable to get any form of education from 20th of March up to now, yes, I'll be failing those examinations, but that cannot be used as a basis to understand whether or not I'm knowledgeable about the issues at hand, but only the fact that I was unable to get online and continue with my learning in that regard. Let me also bring in Baker Bidikuja. Baker would like to talk about how digitalization can be used to be more resilient in the education sector. What are some of the lessons we can learn from this whole encounter? Baker Bidikuja.
Thank you, Romeo. This pandemic has taught us a lot. One, about generally digitization, resilience is very key. That whenever you face any challenges, is that you should be able to come back up. Now, particularly with digitization, it's about availability of the required materials, especially on online. We are encouraging Ministry of Education and also having initiatives with them through training on one, the learners and also the educators or instructors, knowing that one, if you have these records online, as the different schools, they should be able to ensure that they are available as and when. This includes having secure and safe places where the records are kept, but then also NITA is having what is called the government cloud, where some of these records, some of the systems through which the teachers are able to record those who are part of the learning process and also monitoring them. In case one of the main sources of the information is unavailable, what we call backup, the information is backed up elsewhere.
Yeah.
So this one can also be cascaded on an individual level, that we can learn that if you go online, whether the person is doing their study at university or even secondary school, is that they should think about using some of these online platforms, but being sure that they can be able to securely keep the information, but then also backing it up in case anything happens to it. We encourage one, this can be using of the storage devices, but then also the online platforms available, such as the drives. Then the other lesson that we've learned from this digitization, most especially about education, very many speakers have been questioning of how can we be sure that there is no cheating in the exams which are conducted. Indeed. And then the students do not reference to anything, or even when they're in class, they're able to actually, if there are some tests conducted online, they're able to do them ably. So this really speaks to the question of what we call authentication in the online space, Authentication is about a person being able to be sure that whoever is representing themselves, which in the ordinary world we have as signatures, actually is who they say to be. So the lesson that we can learn is knowing the legal landscape that is available. Most people usually when they go online, and even the educators, they may think maybe we do not have laws. Some people may say that we're actually asking for legislation to catch up, but maybe what we need to learn, and what I'm trying to relay, is that Uganda has laws such as the Electronic Signatures Act that actually govern the use of electronic signatures and aspects of authentication, but particularly in respect to conducting exams, still teachers are encouraged, and even us as government are increasingly doing. NITA is rolling out what is called UG Pass, whereby a signature, electronic and digital signatures, can actually be granted. So if a person is given a platform and they sign in, and then it's timed within a particular period of time, then if a result is actually submitted, it can be authenticated, or they check using the time stamps, knowing that the person submitted at this particular point of time, or maybe they moved out of the platform to consider if the internet or things of that sort. So you see it that COVID can actually, all this pandemic has taught us that we can actually use these online platforms and even enhance and be able to conduct teaching in a safe environment from wherever people are, but then also enhance our existing systems of ensuring that someone relays the information the way they've understood it without consulting to anything. But I end also with emphasizing the aspect of privacy and data protection, that most of this information being online, as the results that a person gets, they are specific to a person, so there are also its personal data, because personal data is any information from which an individual can be identified. If a person can tell that actually this is Baker, and then they are dealing with another person X. So the same with the results, the same with the scoring, the monitoring and reviewing all the assessments of the students. This information, people should know that actually the people who have access to it, there should be restrictions. You know, this could be possibly obtaining these platforms. The person needs to sign in with a particular passwords. Then these passwords, the people who develop the platforms should ensure that they are strong enough passwords. The person cannot easily guess it, and they, for a period of time that they expire, and the person has to renew or possibly update. Then the other is, especially in regard to learning, the students and teachers and the instructors need to be sure that whichever information that is actually relayed online or submitted, no other person can change it. Because a person, as we all know, in Uganda, I'll use the example of UNEB, people sit in a room, they bring out that envelope, people check to ensure that it's actually sealed. When the exam, the answer sheets are picked up, it's still sealed with another person confirming, and they sign. Now the challenges with online, someone may wonder, okay, they submit the paper, can a person change? What in cybersecurity we call compromising the integrity. Still, we use this opportunity for people to be aware that there are actually tools that they can use, but then they can reference the law for guidance purposes, but the market has enough of them. So you actually find that there are better tools to use to ensure that the information that is submitted, that is stored, you can actually keep it in the form that you intended to, and in case a person tries to change it, then there will be a record for which it can be referenced. So it's good we are having these conversations. Indeed. Because other parts of the world are really at a stage where they've really gone past this stage. So us catching up is good, but I believe the way we did with other services, the way we moved with mobile money and move past the rest of the world, Indeed. I believe this is an opportunity for us as Uganda to learn, use the laws which are available, but even more so make it practical for both the instructors and the learners. Thank you.
Baker, here's another question. Can we realize a full integration of ICT or digitalization of the education sector minus having trainers or teachers who are well conversant with ICT skills? It's more like having a gun to our heads and then hoping or praying there's no bullet within the chamber. Baker.
Thank you, Romeo. Training is very key, Definitely.
Don't you think we have a
So what we are doing,
and hoping there's
because some of the
chamber?
concepts that we're talking about, maybe they could be a bit high level, you know, considering that it would be too much information for a teacher possibly who doesn't even use a computer or a laptop on a daily basis. But we are well aware of that. Still, government is trying to roll out programs where, at least for the bare minimum, training is done of, well, if you have applications, let's say, such as a Word document, how do you go about it? How do you save it? Because these documents and let's say the Word document, the PDF versions and all that, they have properties within them. So if you're using a particular document, how can you be able to tell that actually Becca is the one that last worked on this document?
Becca, you even went too far talking about the Word document. They can't operate an email.
Sorry?
You went too far talking about a Word document. Some teachers can't operate an email. So meaning whatever I'm drafting in this document, I'm unable to send it to the learner.
That is very true. Now, starting with email, one of the easiest ways that we've, because increasingly we've been educating and training people in district local governments,
yes,
at least teachers can be able to, you know, they're aware they need to read and pass on the knowledge. But years ago, when we started doing this training with the district local government, the information officers and technology officers, they really didn't know what to do. And also administratively, they were appointing people who are information, people who are, from, not that we are, think of them in a lower way, but people from library and science background. So they couldn't tell the difference between ICT and, you know, library and science. So starting with that email, going back to what you've asked,
yes,
telling someone about what documents and they don't even know how to send an email, you start with the basics. At least people who have feature phones, you can send a text message. Then people with smartphones, you can actually, most of them are online, either sending WhatsApp or using other platforms. So you tell them that the email is served in such a way, telling them that, you know, if you're a government official, we are rolling out these services, your email, do not share your password, the same way you wouldn't give your phone to any other person. So that way the transition is easy because they already have communication tools or channels that they use. Now when you transition to using these Word documents and then the properties within them, we let them know. Just the same way you hand over a book to a student and you request them to write their name, their full name, and then indicate their class. This can be done in such a way. So it's a step-by-step process, and we believe if they're able to catch up at a certain point, but even more so, relay the information to the learners, I believe we'll be able to get there. Thank you.
All right, Becca, thank you very much for that humble submission. When you say ICT is the future, but then you do not have ICT infrastructure, what exactly are you trying to achieve? When you say you are respecting continued learning and you want learners to continue with their education, but then you still have a 12% tax on data, what exactly do you want to achieve? Well, largely, let me talk to my panelists on what recommendations government can come up with to ensure that we bridge this gap and promote digitalization of the education sector. Let me start with you, Tobias Abasa, the Information Technology Officer from Kabale Local Government. Becca Birukuja tells us you've been retooled. Some of your teachers have been retooled when it comes to ICT skills. Have you seen any of these activities taking center stage? And what other activities or measures can government put together to ensure a smooth transition to ICT or digitalization of the education sector as we open in January?
Thank you, moderator. I think the government really needs too much involvement in this.
But was he right when he said your teachers have been retooled and trained? Becca, have you seen this taking center stage?
I'm not quite sure about that because basing on the fact that most of the teachers now are not really not teaching. We are not interacting with them always. I may not be in a position to say true or false.
That is fair enough. Go ahead now on measures.
On the measures, I think the government should come up with a clear budget to support the ICT infrastructure into the education institutions. And there should be clear policies guiding on how to use this ICT infrastructure. The government should also look at reducing on the tax on the internet, Because
Or simply removing it, Habasa.
that would be the best, but I don't think it can. But they can reduce on the cost.
They can only fail if they are fronting money over people's interest, Habasa. But in this case, if you want the education to develop in the interest of digitalization, they need to remove these taxes.
It may be a process, and when the government appreciates the importance of ICT, finally it should totally remove the tax.
What other measure, Habasa?
The other measure is to have enough human resource that can really gear up the use of ICT in education. So those are some of the measures.
All right, thank you very much. Tobias Habasa, Information Technology Officer from Kabale Local Government. Let's also bring in Irene Kakande, Deputy Executive Director for Somero, Uganda. Go ahead. Recommendations.
Thank you, Romeo. One of my recommendations is for the government to prioritize ICT, because yes, we do have limited budget, but it also depends on how we cut the little cake that we have. If we can really put some budget attached to ICT, because we need to have the infrastructure in place for the schools to be able to have computers, for the teachers to be retooled, and also to sensitize the community, because the community needs a lot of sensitization. Some people do have access to mobile phones, and we very well know that mobile phones can do a lot, but there are some people who do not know that they can even have the Word, the Office suite installed on their mobile phones for them to continue be doing some work with their mobile phones. So there is a lot of sensitization that needs to go on. Also for enabling the protection of our learners while they are online. We've had high increases in the cases of child trafficking, which is also stemming up online, so we need to do a lot of sensitization on this. And also thinking of ways of reducing or doing away with the taxes, because if we want to go digital, we need to be able to sustain it. How are we going to be able to sustain the learners learning online with these high costs of data? We need to think about issues of reducing the taxes. And also, lastly, this may not be related to digitalization, but we need to have the psychological preparation of our teachers. Our teachers have gone through a lot, as well as the learners, so we need to prepare them earlier for us to bring them back to the classroom setting. There's a lot that needs to be done.
How do you get me from bricklaying all the way to the classroom? How do you get me from border riding all the way to the education institution? I hear you on that one. And lastly?
Yeah, that is it.
All right, Irene Nakakande, Deputy Executive Director for Somero Uganda, another NGO. Well, let's also bring in Patrick Tumwine. He is a technical advisor and in charge of governance and human rights at GIZ. Let's get those recommendations from our funders.
Thank you, Romeo. The most important thing that, of course, as we had this deliberation and discussion, there were quite a number of things that came up, and I think as we discuss all this, one, we need to understand that internet is a right, and what does that mean then? Is that the ingredients that come along with it, that being a right, is very important and critical. One is the element of accessibility, but also affordability. So that has to be understood by those who hold the duty.
Internet penetration and the cost of taxes.
Yes, so that all that whatever we're discussing and rotating around these issues, if internet cannot be accessed, but also cannot be afforded, then we're not discussing something that is realistic. So we have to be realistic on that. And the other thing is to ensure that avoiding creating and widening the gap between the haves and the have-nots.
Thank you.
And that's very, very critical and very important, that as we engage into these issues of digitalization and ensuring that everybody is accessibility and the rest, we leave certain categories of people, the most vulnerable, those who cannot afford, those who cannot access, those who have no abilities, the people with disability, those who cannot read and write. There are a lot of things around that, that this has to be deliberate effort to ensure that no one is left behind. And that effort has to be deliberate, and government is very critical into this. The other is looking at the time that we have. There's enough time to prepare to ensure that this happens, and so that on the other, as we embark on the normal learning, there is both incorporation of the e-learning and the other and the conventional. So there's that hybrid into that. Then the other is one of the colleagues which talked about usage of PowerPoint and the rest of the things. This is very important. This is very critical. But we have to look at spacing. How much space do we have? How much coverage of power do we have? How many schools have power? All this has to be taken into consideration. And how
many schools will get back into the educational fold because of the loans?
Fundamental things for me to move forward.
Indeed. That is Patrick Tumwine. He is an expert when it comes to governance and human rights at GIZ. Well, let's also bring in Maxwell Odongo and get his recommendation, and also Baker Birikuja. Maxwell Odongo, recommendations on how best we can inculcate the digitalization of the education sector to ensure continued learning. Maxwell Odongo. Maxwell Odongo. I am now coming at the high end
when majority of the recommendations have already been exhausted. Now, unfortunately, I have been part and partial of the budgeting process, especially for my sector, education. Resources in education have been allocated to short projects like procurement of radios and so forth. As a matter of recommendation, I would really think that this billion of shillings, amounting to over 380 billion, be used to procure laptops for our learners, especially in elementary level of education, primary and secondary. For tertiary institutions, I'm sure parents who send their children to tertiary institutions are really capable parents.
All right, thank you, Maxwell.
But for basic education level, we need to revert that resources and reallocate it to.
Thank you very much, Maxwell. Baker, in a minute, recommendations
that we need to ensure that our system moves on. Of course, you are well aware that
Maxwell, I'm afraid we've run out of time. Maybe we should accord Baker maybe this last minute so that he could tell us what his recommendation is. Baker Birikuja.
Thank you, Emil. The recommendation, since I'm part of government, maybe I can just say us to increase our efforts in digitizing, connecting the different schools, but then also training. Training is very key. Just a highlight, we've been training district local government officers, not teachers per se, but then this is something that will, as a recommendation, take up with Ministry of Education to use now these virtual platforms, but then also support where we can in providing the internet, but then devices where possible. Thank you.
We need to be factual and we need to be honest. Let's say a war has broken up and we need to send soldiers to the front line to go and fight. Would they be able to do what they do best without guns in their midst? Would you send a soldier to the front line without a gun to help them execute their duties? That's what we are doing with this digitalization of the education sector. We want to inculcate ICT into the education sector, but then we are not availing the tools to the teachers, to the learners, to the communities to be able to ensure digitalization of the education sector. Well, let's ensure that the measures that we need to ensure this reality is achieved are put in place so that it's not only wishful thinking. A special thanks to GIZ, our funders. Ula, I see you in our midst, and everyone who has made this conversation pretty much very possible. My name is Romy Busiku. Special thanks to Maxwell Odongo, Baker Birikuja, Irene Nakakande, Tobias, also from Kabale, and Patrick Tumwine for actually making the time to speak to us and interact with us. It's been a pleasure. COVID-19 and the education sector, opportunities and challenges that could be grabbed in digitalization. My name is Rami Busiku. Have yourselves a blessed day.